Kia ora koutou. Nā mihi nui ki a koutou. Kei te tuahau, I raro I te maru o te whare toi o Pōneke, ki te mihi atu ki a koutou, I roti te āhuatanga o tēnei wā. Ko Johnny ahau, no whakatua ahau. Tēnā koe Ben. Hello everybody and greetings to you all. It's a privilege and an honour to stand here in front of you all. I'm really excited about this event. Acknowledge Ben and your team for putting this together. It's so awesome to see some familiar faces here and catch up with you all. I had to do a bit of research about what TED was about because I didn't really know, and Ben flicked me a couple of links which I checked out. And the one thing I took out obviously was the main thing, which is it's ideas worth spreading. And that kind of struck a chord with me because I've got an idea, and it's an idea that I'm sharing with a lot of people, but it's an idea that we've formed a movement on, and we've formed a group, and some of you may have heard of it. It's called SAVE. And can you just put your hand up if you've heard of SAVE or Students Against Violence? Regen. And SAVE is, this is not a new idea, but SAVE has come up with this idea, and we drive this everywhere we go. And it's just a splurb, but I'll go a bit further into it. Students Against Violence Everywhere is a youth-led, youth-run and youth-orientated organisation striving to create a violence-free future by advocating for creating and spreading positive change in our schools, homes and communities. That's a fancy way of saying that we want to stop all violence. Family violence, youth violence, war. We've looked into some. I've just come back with the brother Panapa from an Indigenous conference. In Auckland, about 500, was it Panapa? About 500 Indigenous people from all over the world just gathered for 4 days to share their traditional knowledge. It was elders, leaders, academics, researchers gathered, and every Indigenous culture had some sort of representation, and they shared their knowledge. And one thing that came through for me here, which is I've just arrived from Auckland last night, so I'm fresh thinking in this Indigenous context, is that our whole world was changed. The way we got to where we are was through violent colonisation, and it was brutal colonisation. We heard these stories from these Indigenous cultures and what had happened to their people. It's just horrific, just blew you away. And we can sit here and so many people in New Zealand trying to ignore colonisation. But we know in New Zealand we have a huge problem with Māori violence. If you're a Māori child, you're 6 times more likely to be abused than any other race. But we've never really got to the deep point about why this sort of thing's happening. And we've never got to the deep point. There's hardly any research around youth violence, and there's hardly any resources. If you want resources around family violence, you could have them like that. But there's nothing around youth violence, and this is where SAVE comes in. So I want to tell you a little bit about SAVE, and then I want to tell you a little bit about violence, and then Ben's asked me to put out a call for action, and I'm really keen to do that. SAVE movement comes from Nelson College whānau class. So there were 3 of us boys in Nelson College whānau class who sat in a room of 50 boys who a lot were affected by family violence, a lot were affected by bullying, a lot were bullies, and we just got sick of it. There was no one ever came to us and stood in front of our class and said violence is not okay, you need to do something about it. We always saw fights. We always saw our headmaster, kick students out of school. They were being sent back to violent homes most of the time. And there was just something not quite working there. And we thought, well, we have to do something about it. But I never want to forget that we went into that with a really narrow mind, so we're still learning. We went into that thinking that domestic violence was not okay because people got killed. But we've learned a lot more since then. And we've been able to identify our own behaviours and the behaviours around us. And what we've come to realise is that every single person is a victim of violence. And just about every single person is a perpetrator of violence at one stage or another, because violence is intimidation, it's verbal abuse, it's emotional abuse, it's psychological abuse, and the statistics tell us that only 10% of violence people experience is actually physical. But yet that's the only 10% that's illegal, it's the only 10% we ever acknowledge, and it's the only 10% that people are out to stop. So we've got to look at this in a more holistic approach. I've got some SAVE. So SAVE is youth-led. We always say we don't talk youth leadership, we walk it. Our boards are all young people, our committees are all young people, we run all campaigns ourselves, we do everything ourselves. We're spread right throughout New Zealand now. I've just been up in Auckland just before this Indigenous conference launching South Auckland SAVE in Manukau City, which was an awesome, awesome event. And we've got SAVE in Gisborne and in Waikato and in Marlborough, and it's popping up in some other places as well. So SAVE is about young people taking ownership of that issue and developing positive ways to try and change it. But first I want to tell you a little bit about New Zealand's violence. So I've brought some statistics along because I'm quite comfortable saying I'm damn ashamed of New Zealand's violence. New Zealand is a dangerous place for young people. In the period between 2000 and 2004, 39 children under the age of 17 were murdered. In 2006, more than 65,000 children were present during reported cases of family violence. This figure has increased every year. Last year, 12 children under the age of 5 years old were killed by someone they knew, probably by someone who was meant to be looking after them, someone whom in their innocence they trusted to protect them from harm. Countless other accidents end up in accident emergency departments presenting horrific injuries, again inflicted by someone they knew. Some, or almost all, will never lead a normal life again, physically and mentally scarred for life at the hands of someone they knew, they trusted and they loved. But many, if not most, never actually end up in hospital. They see their mothers abused at the hands of their fathers, and they might not be hit themselves. So I'm sure all of you know that what a huge problem domestic violence is here in Aotearoa. But a few weeks ago, probably about a month ago, New Zealand Police launched their other statistics, and this highlighted one of the biggest increases in violent crime we've ever seen. I'm not here to make a political statement, but it's ironic that our national government came in saying they were going to stop this sort of stuff, and it's actually only got a hell of a lot worse. And what we've seen is, most of you would have heard of the organisation Sensible Sentencing Trust. Before the election, they put out a 16 policy wish list which they wanted to see changed. Some of those, who's heard of 3 strikes here? 3 strike laws? This is 3 violent offences and you're behind bars for life. There's these sort of laws, and one particularly relevant to young people is that the age of criminal responsibility has gone down, and that's something that's gone unnoticed. Young people are now more vulnerable to this sort of thing at a younger age, and it's horrible. It's a disaster. And of that 16 policy wish list that Sensible Sentencing put up, our National Act Māori Party government has delivered on 14 of them. How many lobby groups do you know get that many policies implemented? Not many at all. Yet what we've seen from all those laws is an increase in violence, not a decrease. So National thought it was easy, they thought they could do it, but they couldn't. And that's because we're missing out one fundamental thing, and that's because all change comes from people, and all change comes from the community. And the only thing we've seen is to fund these policies, because the 3 strikes policy is going to cost a bomb. The only thing we've seen is the funding shift from our end, which is prevention, to other places. So I want to give you one example of a funding cut. I'm not here to make a political statement, but this is really relevant. There's stopping violence programs in Nelson where men are either referred by the court who have been in domestic abuse, or they walk through the doors and they go to these programs. These programs debunk the violence, they debunk their lives, they share their lives with other men in the same position. Before the famous It's Not Okay campaign, which is the one you would have seen on TV, they used to have 70% referrals from the court and 30% referrals from men walking through the door themselves. 2 years into the It's Not Okay campaign, they re-audited those statistics and they had a complete flip. 70% of men were walking through the door and 30% were coming from the courts. From one simple campaign that led to a whole lot of other community change, because that campaign's not just some TV ads, they fund communities all throughout New Zealand to do this sort of thing. They fund organisations like SAVE. What we've just seen in the latest budget is that whole campaign's gone, and that money will no doubt be used to fund these new laws which have only seen an increase in domestic violence. So I just wanted to put that out there as my first concern about where we're heading. But to look at some more statistics, the police attended over 80,000 domestic violence events in 2008. In 2009, domestic violence reporting to the police was up 18% on the year before. But this is where prevention comes in, this is where change from the community comes in, because only 20% of domestic violence is reported. 80% of domestic violence goes unreported, unnoticed, hidden by secrecy, hidden by silence, and it's the silence of our communities, it's the silence of our whānau. We've all seen it. We've all seen some sort of example of violence. And if we did nothing about it, we are contributing to that silence. So I'm going to get to that a little bit later. There's a lot of myths around about domestic violence as well, and one is that it's a Māori problem. And let me tell you, it's not a Māori problem. The statistics are bad, but domestic violence happens everywhere. It does not discriminate. It is prevalent everywhere in society. The reporting is higher amongst Māori and Pacific Islanders because they fit that stereotype. It happens amongst heterosexual couples and amongst same-sex partnerships. It occurs in all age ranges, ethnic backgrounds and economic levels. And it's certainly not limited to physical assault. So what I want to see is just paint a little bit of a picture of that. As you can see, it's really easy to get statistics on domestic violence because, on average, we have 14 women, 10 children and 5 men killed by a family member every year. It's really easy to pinpoint these statistics. But what we've noticed is that youth violence is equally as big a problem. And youth violence, we know, is often fueled by alcohol. But I want to catch up on that for a minute there as well, because our youth movement can often be perceived as us saying, yes, young people are violent, we're going to do something about it. That's not what we are saying. Violence, alcohol, drugs, everything have been a problem for generations before us. I mean, I said New Zealand and the world was formed on violent colonisation. And it's been a problem forever. And right now, I mean, this will resonate well with some of you, young people are taking the blame for it. And young people are on the front page of papers and being told that we're disorderly, being told we're violent, and being told that we have a problem with alcohol. And we do. But the perception there is that all young people have problems with alcohol, all young people are violent, and all young people are disorderly, which is completely false. Yet nothing we do that's positive can ever make the media, because good news doesn't make the news, and that's a reality. And that's why these violence is very misrepresented. And I want to give you an example. Who's here has heard of Nia Glassy? Nia Glassy was the baby killed in a dryer, put in a dryer and killed. But that's the injury that caused her death. She lay lying in a coma after that for 36 hours before anyone took her to the hospital. She was 3 years old. She lived a short life. She died at the hands of all her whānau. It wasn't just her mother or her father. It was all her whānau. This is just one example of the many children that are being killed in New Zealand. That's what it comes down to. And she was used for wrestling. When she was crying, they would put her under a fold-out couch. They would put her in it and fold the couch back down so they couldn't hear her. They used to drag her through sandpits half naked just to shut her up, because that's one thing they found that would shut her up. And this is the horrible, horrible things that could be happening next door to you. But the problem we have in New Zealand is no one knows how to deal with it. We still haven't learned how to deal with it. Agencies still haven't learned how to deal with violence. And that's what's most concerning. But what I want to say is, when I'm on the subject of media, is during that period, Nia Glassy's death headlined the news for about 6 weeks. And it was headline, and it was, you had Christine Rankin and Garth McVicker and all these high-profile people who were saying, we need to throw these rotten abusers behind bars. And we need to stop this child abuse, and there's Nia Glassy's lying here, and we need to hold someone accountable. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with admitting that there were some rotten people out there who did that to Nia Glassy, but I don't think that's hitting the fundamental problem, throwing them behind bars. But the point is here, during that stage, 3 Pākehā babies in higher economic levels were killed during that time. Not one of them made the news. Some of them made newspapers, some of them made radio, very little, but Nia Glassy dominated the news for 6 weeks. And this is where we've got to be aware of media representation. And media is what educates people. Let's not pretend that we get our education from somewhere else, because in reality we don't. Most of our education comes from the media, and they do not report Pākehā deaths. They report Māori deaths in low socioeconomic families. So that's the first thing. Let's bust this myth away that this is a Māori problem. This is everyone's problem. New Zealand has the worst, child abuse in the OECD. We should be ashamed of it, but we should be motivated to do something about it as well. And that's not about going out there and getting on the streets and saying, let's throw these parents behind bars, because if they're behind bars, they've already done it. So we're not getting to the fundamental problem. And I just want to show a quick video. So this video is the next part of my kōrero, which is about how we're learning from our adults' behaviours. And this is where it comes back to drinking and everything that's been a problem for generations. This is actually an Australian TV ad, but it's a good representation of the way things actually work in our society. this is the sort of thing that's funded in Australia, and I mean, on that note as well, things are much better funded in Australia around this sort of thing. But this is what we're trying to achieve in New Zealand. We've got the It's Not Okay campaign, and we're trying to put these ads played on Australian TV, and they would have changed the attitudes of some people, just like our campaign has. You know, it's just, I'm sorry I'm emphasising on that campaign, the funding, but it's because I've spent the whole day with the Ministry of Social Development, and they've just lost all their funding for this campaign, so that's really sad. So today I've been a bit consumed by that. But what I really want to say is that there's positivity to this. I've given you a reflection of statistics. The statistics only make up for 20% of our violence, which is just horrible when we think about how bad those statistics are. And we know that we see violence around us and there's only 10% is physical. And that's a really negative way to look at it, and that's a way that can bring us down. But there's also some really positive things happening out there. And one of them is the family violence campaign, obviously. And there's a whole lot of good people out there doing some really good things. And the SAVE movement is just a piece of the puzzle to that. But everyone is included in this. And I want to say that, reflect on a quote, that Gandhi, which is be the change you want to see in the world. And I know it seems really cliche and everything, but it's true. We in SAVE have a huge emphasis on looking at our own behaviours and what we're doing around, because most people don't identify themselves as perpetrators and they don't identify themselves as victims, but at the end of the day, a lot of us are. And we need to work out in our everyday lives what we're seeing. I was in Manukau City the other day and we're in a supermarket, and the person in the queue behind us, it was a couple. The husband goes, "Go and get some Weight Watchers meals." She said, "I don't want any." And he went like this, pointed at his fist. And she went and got some. And she came back, and it was one of those moments, she came back to the Weight Watchers meal and looked really upset about it, but she just had to do it because of this one symbol. Now, I don't doubt that a whole lot of people in that supermarket saw that. I saw it. And I do this stuff every day. I travel around the country talking about violence, and I saw it. And it was even one of those moments when I went, what can I actually do about it? And there's little actions that we can do, but it's acknowledging that, because a lot of people would have been blind to that. People put up these blinds like it's not happening. And that's the saddest thing about New Zealand's violence, is we're blaming it on the perpetrators, but it's actually all our fault. And when a baby dies in New Zealand, we blame it on the doctors, the nurses, the police, the SIFS workers, and the social workers, right? But in actual fact, the people that could have stopped it are the whānau, the friends, the neighbours, everyone in the community. Before a baby dies, there are so many obvious signs that it's happening, and yet none of us step in and do it. So SAVE is believing in the power of young people to do this. So the next generation, bringing us up, educating us. And so I want to do this on a positive note. So the next video is of our recent conference. So in April, we had our first conference, because SAVE's very new. It's only 1 year old. That was a video of the first ever Young Leaders Conference on Violence. It was on the 16th of April with 150 young people from all around New Zealand. This is something we've been planning for ages, but the idea of that was to educate and empower our young leaders coming from all different contexts, and they really did come from all over the show. Some of you would have recognised some of them, and others just came from all over. The positive thing about that was we had a really high representation of Māori, and this is where it really comes in. There are a lot of good people out there wanting to do a lot of good things, and we truly can. So the last thing I want to say is never doubt your impact. There's this thing that a lot of people talk about in this sector, and this is that if a woman is in a violent relationship and her life is at harm, and you go to her letterbox and you put a flyer in that has the number for Women's Refuge, and she gets into a safe house and out of that relationship, you could have saved her life. And let's never ever forget that every single person in this room has the power to influence, friends, your neighbours, people in your own family perhaps who need this help. You need to give them the numbers, you need to give them the support, and most importantly, you need to talk about it. And this is the problem. And we have this violence, but we're too afraid to talk about it because it is shameful. And it is a shameful thing, and the victim wears the shame, whereas the perpetrator should be wearing the shame, not the victim. But we need to be out there and talking about it. We need to talk to our friends about it. Have you seen it? Have you experienced it? Where have you seen it? What can we do about it? Let's make a change. We can change these statistics, We have to stop 14 women, 10 children and 5 men being killed every year, because every year that number's going up. And that's more concerning than ever, because is it getting worse? Are we getting more silent about these things? And we must never, ever, ever be quiet about violence. Kia ora koutou katoa.